Well, thank you very much for joining us for another open forum discussion at ICMI21. We've actually got a guest panelist with us today, Karl from New Zealand. Karl, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, yeah, I'm Karl from New Zealand. What else do you want me to say?
And how did you get an interest in men's rights or men's issues more generally?
Yeah, it was when I was studying as a counsellor a number of years ago. I came across a video series called Men, Woman, Myth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that kind of blew my mind. And, I'd been struggling through my 20s and 30s with depression. And just watching these videos, it kind of all clicked and made sense of, it's kind of history from there. And then I have used that kind of knowledge in my own counselling and therapy with men.
Oh, that's fabulous! Actually, that's always great to hear counsellors who are taking on the information on board and using it. That's fabulous because, as we know, there's I'm sure you know better than me that feminism is endemic. I think in counselling, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in a place with 8 females, and then I got made redundant. So I think I crossed the line a few times with some of the feminists there, and it cost me my job.
Yep. Unfortunately, that's all too common an experience where we hear either of people being outed as MRAs or even just being outed as advocating for men, or, as you say, in your case, you're trying to do it in the professional sphere. Rob Tiller had a similar, I don't know if you know Rob Tiller, but he is a counsellor in Western Australia, and he was working for an organisation called Relationships Australia, which I think it's independent, but it's constituted by the government. And if in the event that if there's some sort of family dispute, then usually there's a requirement for the parties to go through Relationships Australia to try to mediate before going on to court and so forth. Anyway, Rob had basically was dismissed actually from his position in Relationships Australia in Western Australia. My understanding is each organisation, each state, the organisation is separate. So Relationships Australia, Western Australia is different to the ones in the other states. But he was dismissed in this position, and he took them for an unfair dismissal, and it was not upheld. So as in the dismissal was upheld, it was his application for unfair dismissal was overturned. So, which I think was really disappointing. It was I mean, I shouldn't talk too much about specifics, I guess, but I'm not in favour with a lot of the minute details, but a lot of it was about feminist indoctrination within Relationships Australia and so forth, and how much of a problem that is. So, and I think a lot of men and women in our community, actually, a number of women in our community have spoken to me about this, their own interactions with Relationships Australia, and just being absolutely amazed at some of the things that are said and done. So, but anyway, so I'm glad to hear that as a counsellor, you're actually bring that information on board. So, we have a question. Great. Yes, we have a question. Excellent. So Sean says, I arrived at this, my first ICMI, holding anti-feminism above my head like a proud banner. I've been deeply impressed by what MRAs are achieving without waving the banner. Have I been like a fish complaining about the water? Thanks for the question, Sean. So I don't know if I've got some thoughts on that. Do you want to tackle that one? And you can see that question, by the way, in front of you, Karl, if you need it.
I'm reading it now. Yeah. Have I been like a fish complaining about the water?
Do you want me to jump in on that one?
Yes, please. And I might add some comments afterwards. Yeah.
No worries at all. So basically, right. So if you were to look at the page, I don't know if Sean, if you've ever read A Voice for Men. Now, I'm an editor at A Voice for Men, and I also help maintain the site and so forth. I've had involvement within A Voice for Men since I think 2015 or so. That's of course Paul Williams' site, and if you watch the Red Pill, it's mentioned extensively in the Red Pill. If you look at A Voice for Men, you'll see the tone there is quite different to the tone at ICMI. There are speeches at ICMI that we would not publish on A Voice for Men. Okay, they have the two entities have a different mandate, even though A Voice for Men is one of the organisations, and I mean, well, one of the organisations that always been involved with ICMI. Paul Eon founded the ICMI series. Although he's not as actively involved now, we do keep him in the loop, and he's involved with the organising committee and so forth. So he knows what we're doing. But there are things here that we will put on ICMI that we would not put on Voice for Men. There are people here who are okay with male genital mutilation, for example. Anne Whittingham, where there was almost a heated discussion in one of the early sessions when this topic came up. I spoke to a counsellor or a psychologist, I should say, yesterday, who felt that the tender years doctrine was okay. Now, that's something that typically MRAs would absolutely reject. So the tender years doctrine is a doctrine that says that children should be with their mothers up in the first 5 or 6 years of life. And this is a doctrine that many countries have officially abolished, but continue to embrace unofficially. Anyway, so you'll see a broader range of content here than you would at A Voice for Men and some of the other sites, and that's quite deliberate. Anti-feminism is very much a part of what we do. However, the ICMI conferences, there are the international conferences on men's issues, right? So the focus is on men's issues, not so much on the feminism side. Feminism comes up where it's relevant, but you won't see very often strong anti-feminist talks here. There have been a few on ICMIs, but they're only a minority of talks. Karl, any thoughts? Otherwise, we can happily keep chatting.
No. I mean, I think you covered that. I don't have anything to add there.
No worries. If you don't mind me asking, and you can always tell me, you can always decline to answer the question. Would you call yourself anti-feminist, non-feminist? Because some people do. Some people prefer the title non-feminist, or none of the above.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for equality, and I originally, was interested in. That's what got me interested in feminism, many years ago. But I, through that video series, Man, Woman, Myth, I quickly learned that that's not what feminism is about.
Exactly.
It's been. I'm fine with men and women being equal. But as soon as one tries to say that they're superior to the other or better than the other, that's when I start to have issues. I mean, yeah. I mean, yes, there's certain things that men could do better than women and women could do better than men, purely based on our physicality. But when you kind of say that one's superior to the other, that's when I think, well, that's a crock of shit. Yeah.
I formed the opinion when I was quite young, actually, that so just to be, first of all, I say that most anti-feminists are former feminists.
Right.
Yeah, that's a pretty common experience, that people go into feminism thinking it's about some sort of gender equality, treating people the same, and discover pretty quickly, or sometimes not so quickly, that it isn't. And soon it might be it's a year, 2 years, 20 years. Eventually they leave feminism, and many of them become anti-feminists. So when I was probably about 13 or 14, I formed the opinion that gender differences, any sort of claim to superiority, was probably fairly subjective and situational. So there are circumstances in which men may do better in a particular situation, and maybe circumstances in which women do better in a particular situation. And I sort of, in the end, I concluded those sort of arguments didn't have much value for me. What I'm interested in is legal and social equality of men and women. We have found differences. There are innate differences between men and women. I happen to think, so our species shows what they call low sexual dimorphism, which means that compared to other species, our species, males and females are actually pretty similar when you compare to a lot of other species. But if, sorry, briefly lost my train of thought there. But if you're basically looking at those sort of comparisons, what I'm interested in is that legal and social equality of men and women, and the idea there is that even though the differences exist, we treat people the same before the law. So that's the way I see it, and in society, that's how I would see it. And I think that only when I got involved with the men's rights movement nearly a decade ago did I find people who actually thought that as well. That's what really, I think, really opened my eyes.
Right.
Yes. So Dean Hedges has asked a question. That's a good question. Are there non-feminists who become feminists? I know there are a good group of feminists who become anti-feminists, and that's a great question by Dean. So
Wow.
anecdotally, I'm unaware of any sort of studies on it, but anecdotally, it appears that very, very few people go from non-feminist or anti-feminist to feminist. Every once in a while, I see a claim by somebody, interestingly enough, usually male, who says they've done that. Very rarely, but occasionally I have seen them. Or more notably, they'll claim that they went from being a men's rights activist to a feminist. And every time I read one of these, I look at it and I just have no idea who this person is. So I've never seen them in our groups.
Yeah. So, likewise.
Yeah. So if they were an I mean, I pretty much know every prominent MRA in the world today, and I just, if these people were there, maybe they were there for 5 minutes. I don't know, probably not. So that's my thought of it. Yeah, go on, Karl.
And why would you go public with that anyway? I mean, what are you? I mean, what are you trying to? Who are you trying to impress, and what are you trying to prove?
Yeah.
But and where are you actually saying that?
Yeah.
I am kind of the belief that that a lot of people who talk about stuff aren't the ones doing stuff, and then you've got those who are doing stuff that don't necessarily talk about it.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And actually, one of the things I taught my daughter one day, it's actually, so I don't talk much about my family. I keep my personal life out of my activism. That's actually a request. The two things I'll admit is, one, I'm married, and two, I have a daughter. But my daughter actually appears in ICMI21. She became something of a mascot for ICMI21. And if you look, you'll see her at the beginning. And she's mentioned the beginning and the end, and she actually appears at one point in the middle of the conference, which is kind of cool.
Okay.
But anyway, the point I was getting onto, one thing I said to my daughter was that, we talk about all sorts of topics, and geopolitics comes up. She's a teenager now. If you look at countries that have democratic in the name, they tend not to be democratic, because democratic countries don't have to tell you they're democratic. You can see they're democratic. Yes. So I see something of a parallel there. So we've got a question from Sean. Perhaps one needs to pay feminism enough attention in the first place to migrate into anti-feminism. To a casual glance, feminism seems reasonable. Who doesn't want women to be happy? Exactly. That's right. And actually, I don't know. So if you want to, I'll probably jump in there if you're happy with it, Karl, and then certainly by all means chime in with any thoughts. Yep. In fact, I think there's really a couple of points there. That's right. Particularly Westerners for at least the last 50 or 60 years have very much been of the position that we should have legal and social equality before the law. And also, getting onto that, a sort of a side point from that, feminists, by the way, are giving up the word equality. Thank you, feminism. So in the last 5 years, they particularly started to shift away from it. Douglas, I think, mentioned this actually in his talk. So they're using the word equity. He talked about different sort of equality of opportunity and equality of outcome and so forth, using the word equity, and using other terms now. As Douglas mentioned, watch his talk for details there. I think this is great, actually, because I think they just handed us the word equality, which is, they're not, it may sound terrible, but I don't think the feminist movement has been very good at long-term planning, in all honesty, despite their actual apparent success. I think they tend to be short-term planners. That's my view, but Douglas may disagree, actually, based on his talk. But I did want to say that the idea that Short's last comment is to a casual glance, feminism seems reasonable. Who doesn't want women to be happy? And when you said that, the thing that came to my mind was gynocentrism. And Karl, are you familiar with the concept of gynocentrism? I'm not sure.
Yes, I am.
Great. So that's fabulous. So I'm not sure sort of how long you've been reading watching the videos, reading the sites. That's fabulous. I'll just quickly give basically gynocentrism is really essentially, as it sounds, putting women in the center, and it's something you see across many societies today. Peter Wright has done some great work to talk about the origins of Western gynocentrism in the Middle Ages. There's an open debate about whether or to what extent it is innate versus learned. I tend to think it's a bit of both. I think we probably won't be able to completely abolish it. But we very clearly see both men and women having far more concern when a woman is harmed. And this comes right back to that point, who doesn't want women to be happy? And the answer is nobody, actually, because people want women to be happy. Women want women to be happy, and men want women to be happy.
Yeah. See, I take issue with this, with who doesn't want women to be happy. I'm happy for people to be happy, but the responsibility of them to be happy is up to them. It's not up to me.
Yep.
I, as an adult, I need to take care of my own emotions, and my own happiness comes in that.
Yes.
But I'm not responsible for someone else's, and vice versa. So if I'm in a relationship with someone and they tell me that they're not happy, or I did not make them happy, well, I never signed up to make them happy. Yeah, so that's where I'm happy that women want to be happy, but as soon as a woman tells me that I'm there to make her happy, I'm not going to buy into that. And likewise with a man either. Yeah.
I suppose you could say, well, there's aspects like mutual support in relationships that would lead to happiness. But I think you're saying it's along, there will be along mutual lines.
Yes, but I don't see it as my job to make somebody happy.
No, fair enough. So there's so Sean's made something in the Q&A as well, the questions. But Douglas has made a comment. I just want to read Douglas's comment.
Yeah.
So it is interesting that these people, articles say things like, "I was a men's rights activist and now I'm a feminist." In other words, there's a mission that you cannot be a campaigner for men's rights as well as being a feminist. And this is a really interesting point. So people have asked me, is it possible to simultaneously be a feminist and a men's rights activist? And my answer is, and again, I'm really interested in what other people have to say this. My answer is, technically it's possible. Sorry, I think theoretically it's possible. As a matter of practicality, it is not possible. So I think that there are people who come into men's rights who initially call themselves feminists, but I don't think you get very far before you start to realize that feminism is part of the problem. So I think there are a few people who may initially jump in and go, yep, I'm going to talk about these issues and so forth and help men. Oh, and I'm a feminist, right? But you start to go a bit further. I think before long, you give up the feminist label. And I became a men's rights activist before I became an anti-feminist. That's my view. When I got involved, I was focusing on the issues, but I guess I would have been a non-feminist before that. But then about a few months later, I was saying, yeah, I've really got to take a position on feminism as well. I think it's pretty clear. Karl, did you have
Can you just clarify for me the difference between a non-feminist and an anti-feminist?
Well, that's a really good question. So, and I'll get to you in a minute short. That's a really good question. There's actually a gentleman by the name of Feidelbogen who used to post on A Voice for Men a lot. He's not posting so much now, not so active now, but he talked a lot about that. But I think that an anti-feminist is one who opposes feminism, and a non-feminist is simply who takes a clear position of not being a feminist and not necessarily opposing it. I'm openly an anti-feminist. I actively oppose it. Whereas there are a number of other people, including prominent people in our community, would call themselves non-feminists.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll get to Sean's question.
Sean's question,
yeah. Can you comment on the use of the word equalities in the plural? Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for asking this. To my mind, this is illogical and absurd. I can't stand the word equality, so I really can't. It sounds like academic waffle to me. And again, and our community is very much about offering alternative opinions and not shutting people down and letting people have their, express their opinions. So if other people want to disagree with me or even explain the word equalities to me, by all means do so. Really sounds like academic waffle to me. And I'm afraid I've occasionally heard people on our side picking it up. And one thing I am more generally is I think we need to be careful on making sure feminists don't control the narrative, control the language, because they really do try to do that. They are quite good at it. And you do hear people, even the word narrative, I must admit, is a word that I think I first heard among feminists. Admittedly, I'm using that one because I think it's not too bad, but there are a lot of other terms that feminists use that I actively avoid using, and people on our side don't always do that. And I think it's something we all need to be mindful of. And equalities is one of those words. So I can't provide you with. So there's another one. Masculinities. That's
masculinities. That's what came to my mind.
Yes, so exactly.
I mean, to me, this just smacks of what do they call it? Identity politics, exactly. where you just cut up society into little groups. And it's just, I mean,
that's exactly.
I kind of think yeah, I kind of think of it like a pizza, and I mean, you could cut a pizza up into maybe 8 pieces, and that's fine. But if you keep on cutting that pizza up, after a while, you're just going to demolish the damn thing. So yeah, just let's just stick to equality rather than equality. So
Exactly, that's right. That's right.
It is illogical and absurd.
Yes. In fact, Douglas has made a good point. So I'm actually I'll be having a Q&A with Douglas in the near future. Douglas has said, I've tried being a non-feminist. I was forced into being anti-feminist by the opposition from feminist organisations. Indeed, I agree. So yes, so in terms of those, I think that's all academic waffle. And
yep.
So okay.
I've just worked out how to see the chat. Sorry.
Oh, good. No worries at all. No worries at all.
I can see the questions, but not the chat. And I've just worked out how to do it.
Oh, very good. So yes, so I can absolutely agree with Sean that I think it's illogical and absurd. Sean said I got pulled up by Hannah Wallen for using the word reimagine. I'm so grateful. She altered my thinking just by focusing on one word. Right. Actually, I'd be interested in on your thoughts there, Sean, in relation in particular to sort of what you're getting at there. So yeah, so basically, I guess so this is, by the way, is a short session. It's only about half an hour, so I will be wrapping up in a few minutes. And the reason for that actually is because I think we've got Douglas's Q&A coming up next. We need a little bit of prep time ahead of time. Yeah, so Douglas we've got a comment here. One reason for equalities rather than equality is because if equality is gained, it can more easily be stated that there are still more equalities to be gained. Very good point.
Oh my goodness!
Very good point. Yes, and I think that would be a great one for me to add to Wiki for Men, actually. So, the Wiki
that just gives me a headache, Matt.
Yeah, the linguistic shell game, says Sean.
Yeah.
So Wiki for Men is a resource that we've been building for a number of years. Voice for Men is behind it. Australian Men's Rights Association, where I'm the president, is behind it as well. So the two organisations backing it, and it's meant to be dispassionate topics and dispassionate explanations and so forth. So it's got a glossary, and we're continuing to build all the time. Now, again, I was talking earlier about ICMI, it has a different tone. How it has a different tone. Wiki for Men, again, has a little bit of a different tone as well, a little bit more academic, although we obviously articles on A Voice for Men often are well cited, but there are some more opinion pieces, whereas Wiki for Men is more just the academic side of things. And if anyone wants to contribute there, just get in contact with me, and anyone attending this conference will be more than welcome to have an account on that. I would love to have more editors on there, in fact. So we've got about 5 more minutes. Do we have any more questions? Otherwise, there's all sorts of things we can talk about, like work-life balance, for example. That's always a fun topic to talk about. So, Karl, how do you feel your work-life balance is these days?
Well, because I'm unemployed, I have plenty of time on my hands.
I didn't know that. Okay, I didn't know that. Fair enough.
Yeah, but I think with work-life balance, for me, there's that speaks to me about a difference between doing and being, and I think those two things need to be in balance. But there are wee times when, I mean, like this at the moment, I mean, you're obviously not having much time to be, you're doing. So there'll be seasons where I mean, by balance, I don't necessarily mean it's always going to be 50-50, but I think some of these things need to be in check. If you just keep on going without having time for rest and relationships and stuff like that, you're just going to burn yourself out.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, actually. In fact, I struggle with this a little bit because when I was younger, I used to overwork, as a lot of men do. As I've got older and as I got involved in the men's rights movement, and I got the idea that men should be taking better care of themselves and so forth, and I do try to maintain a better work-life balance. But at the same time, there's things like ICMI conferences to do, and there are things that I want to do. And it's really is interesting about that desire, particularly of men, I think, to want to create and produce something and get something out there. So it has been tiring doing the ICMI, but it is only once a year. Well, it's been a few months for preparing it, but it is only once a year. And after that, there'll be things I'll be getting back to. I'll be spending more time on A Voice for Men and finishing my book and so forth. yes, you're right. There's a balancing act, isn't there, between that achieving what you want, but also making sure you get enough time for rest.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, we've got a comment from Sean. Words have no purpose other than conveying meaning. So knowing that they're being understood exactly as intended is crucial. So he said, spoke getting pulled up on words by an active listener is an error checking process and a really good thing. So Sean was just talking about how Hannah had sort of, if I could use the term, called him out on a particular term. Yes, I think it's really important for us to be very careful with our definitions and our nomenclature. Actually, I try to be. I tend to be, so my brain tends to work that way anyway. But I do try to be careful with my definitions. One in particular, we've only got a couple of minutes, but I'm going to try to throw this in. A term which has declined, I'm pleased to say, and I hope I was able to contribute to that. There's a term that used to be used very widely, patriarchy theory, and I really didn't like it. Used among MRAs and feminists, and I have encouraged people over the last 10 years to say the patriarchy, not patriarchy theory. And the reason, well, a couple of reasons. Firstly, a theory gives it far too much credence. It's more like you could call it the patriarchy myth if you wanted, perhaps. But to call it a theory is just giving it far too much credence. And also, too, I've seen feminists dodge it by people using that terminology. So an MRA will say, "Oh, patriarchy theory," and the feminists will go, "Well, I don't know what that is. I never use that term," though, and they just dodge the question. So my advice is call it what they call it, the patriarchy. And over the last 10 years, I think there's definitely been a decline in the use of the term patriarchy theory in favor of the patriarchy. At least that's the way it seems to me.
Okay, well.
So I'm glad I got to get, oh, hello, Natalie. We have about 1 minute. Poor Natalie's been up since 5. So I'm about to disconnect. So thank you very much, everybody. But Natalie and I have a Q&A coming up, so that's okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Like for this one, I'm so sorry, guys.
Oh, it's all good.
Don't worry at all. Karl and I have been having a good chat with the attendees. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you, Natalie and Douglas, in a Q&A coming up soon. Thanks, Karl. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.